War Beneath the Roots is a fantasy fiction podcast. While rooted in tabletop storytelling, this is a fully written narrative crafted for audio. Video versions are available to enhance the experience with maps and art, but they're not necessary. This podcast contains violence and themes that may not be suitable for all audiences. She walked at dawn. No sky, no sun. Only the gray drift of spores. Her steps were slow, deliberate. The outpost lay behind her, smoke choking its gate. The bodies vanished, no sign of life but the bloom. She kept moving, past shattered wagons, splintered cartwheels. The forest closed in. Trees bowed with rot. Mushrooms glowed at twisted roots, beckoning her deeper. Her arm throbbed where she had cut out the fungus. She pressed a hand to the wound. It stung. A whisper trailed on the breeze. Closer. No voice, no echo. She paused, breath caught. A circle of blooms had erupted beneath her feet, black petals stained with rust. Something wriggled at their center. She knelt, fingers trembling. The earth pulsed. Her hand hovered above the spore-slick cap. She noticed dark water slowly moving ahead. A memory, bright as fire, flared. Of green leaves, clear streams, laughter in warm sun. It died. She rose, shoulders shaking. Ahead, over the dark stream, the trail forked. One path led west toward the dead lands of Midborg's advance through the central landmass. The other, Fenverden. She'd heard of Fenverden, how the statues there murmur secrets, answers, and it's on the path. Home. She vanished between the trunks, down the path southward. No songs followed, no footprints remained. Grateful to escape. I am Benjamin Harris. Welcome to War Beneath the Roots. Chapter 3. They emerged from the Fellgrove into a shattered clearing at dusk. Blue's tracking had proved sufficient. Fog curled along the earth, and the trunks of ancient pines formed jagged silhouettes against the bruised sky. Beyond the snarl of underbrush lay the warband's crude encampment, a dozen hobgoblin tents ringed by makeshift siege scaffolds, flickering torch fires, and the low barks of chained wargs. 2 ogres lounged on rotten logs. Hobgoblin spears glinted in the failing light. Beam moved among the group like drifting smoke. A faint pulse of bioluminescent spores unfurled from his body, swirling briefly in the air before sinking into skin like dew. The sound of squishing mud as their cuts and scrapes closed. Bruises faded as if time rewound, and fatigue lifted like mist from their bones. The scent of moss and fresh rain lingered in his wake, and for a fleeting moment each of them felt deeply, inexplicably whole. Markin Treefoot pressed himself against a mossy rock. His chest ached with every breath. Memories of Eliza and Aldrich's death clawed at his thoughts, but he swallowed them down. There was no turning back. Behind him, Beam stood utterly still, a living colossus of bark and root. Moss draped his shoulders. Spores slipped from his limbs like drifting snow. To Markin's eyes, the druid looked more a part of the forest than not. At his flank, Blue the Minotaur inhaled, steam curling from his flared nostrils. His horns crackled with shifting blue veins of lightning-bright magic. His broad shoulders flexed beneath his tense but determined expression, and the great axe on his back seemed to hum with promise. Near the back of the ridge, Mr. E toyed with a pocket watch. Clock digits spinning backwards, he tapped its side. His grin vanished as time rippled around the clearing, barely perceptible. Markin inhaled. "Everyone ready?" Blue grunted assent. Beam's spores pulsed, answering him without words. Mr. E winked at Markin, grinning like a mad child. With a silent signal from Beam's upraised staff, the clearing erupted. A ghostly green mist rolled across the ground. Hobgoblins staggered, eyes rolling, faces contorting. Shouts became screams as roots burst from the soil, coiling around ankles, crushing wrists. One hobgoblin's neck twisted under violent roots. He fell, limbs twitching, blood pooling beneath him. Mr. E spun in place, hands sweeping through the air. Time buckled. The ogre's charge slowed to a crawl, their clubs hanging in mid-swing. A warg froze, drool suspended in a web of magic. Markin exhaled and loosed arrow after arrow. One arrow shattered through a hobgoblin's eye socket, bone fragments embedding in the tent flap. The next erupted from another's chest, ribs splaying outward in a fountain. Under the fractured sky, the wargs snarled as their collars shimmered with arcane light. Then time surged. Their howls turned dry, rasping croaks as fur thinned, muscles withered, and bones cracked beneath their weight. Mr. E swayed breathless as the beasts had aged a dozen years in seconds and dropped like husks to the earth. Blue's roar tore through the clearing. He crashed through the outer ring of chaos like an avalanche, lightning blue veins flaring down his horns. His axe cleaved through the hobgoblin ranks, shield splintered, flesh rent. A hobgoblin arm sailed overhead, landing in a brazier with a hiss. As hobgoblins fell, an ogre lumbered free of Mr. E's spell. Club raised, it barreled toward Beam's flank. Beam's eyes glowed as searing white light. Bark cracked and twisted, limbs thickened, fur sprouted in patches across his wooden frame. In seconds, Beam had become a massive, snarling forest bear, claws black as obsidian. Now as massive as a warhorse, Beam charged the ogre. The ogre swung its club, catching Beam square in the side of the head with a loud crack. The forest bear howled in pain. When the ogre reared back for a second swing, Beam caught the ogre's raised arm with an angry, rending swipe. Bones snapped. The ogre roared as its arm fell limp, the club thudding in the mud. With a final roar, Beam sprang up onto the ogre's torso, teeth tearing at the throat. Blood gushed in a dark waterfall. The ogre fell, a living mountain reduced to ruin. At the heart of the camp, a black-tented pavilion marked the warlord's position. Flanked by two chained direwolves, he wore a spiked helm and carried a wicked glaive. His scarred face split in a grin as Blue approached. "Oi, Tuskhead!" The warlord sneered. Lunging, he planted his glaive into Blue's thigh. Blue staggered and snarled. As the direwolves lunged at Blue, Mr. E flicked his watch. Time snapped back. The beasts hit the ground, their momentum reversed. They skidded backwards, crashing into their chains. Blue roared, eyes now blazing electric blue. His aura crackled as lightning danced along his horns. His battle lust glowed wild. Boluses of raw energy rippled outward. The wolves recoiled, yelping as fur singed and chains rattled. The warlord struck again, glaive slicing through Blue's side. Blood spurted, sizzling where it struck the embers of the campfire. Blue staggered again, muscles quivering. He roared, voice echoing like a horn around the clearing. He charged, seizing the warlord's wrist, twisted, and wrenched the glaive free, cracking the hobgoblin's arm in a single motion. "You bought me once," Blue growled through the pain. He crushed the warlord's fingers further until bone and tendon gave way. The warlord barked in pain. Markin fired his final surgical arrow into the warlord's shoulder. The warlord staggered, eyes wide with terror. Blue's head whipped around to Markin, his horned silhouette cutting into the smoke like a blade. For a beat, the great Minotaur's blue eyes shone with a furious possessiveness. He fixed Markin with a glare so scorching it left the boy's blood chilled. Markin jerked, quiver rattling against his shoulder. heart pounding beneath Blue's furious gaze. Blue returned his attention to the warlord, lifting him by his throat, spittle and blood dripping from his tusks as he whispered, "Then you sold me to the dragon, Olathontor." Recognition flickered in the warlord's gaze. You are the cub they traded." Blue held the hobgoblin warlord aloft in one hand as he spun, his axe a blur in the other, cleaving the warlord's arm to splinters and carving almost entirely through his torso. Blue's head reared back. The warlord managed to eke out, Your father." Blue slammed the warlord's skull against his own, spraying blood across the tent's black canvas. The body slid limply from Blue's grip with a thud. The echoes faded. The few remaining hobgoblins fled beneath a rising moon. The direwolves whimpered, flinching in their chains. Oaks stood witness to ruin. Markin lowered his bow, chest heaving. Beam's spores settled softly as he returned to his normal state. Mr. E snapped his fingers and the watch hands snapped forward. Time fell back into place. Blue stood amid the ruin, his axe and his side dripping, horn cracked, breathing ragged. His gaze found Markin's. He nodded. No words were needed. Beam approached the fallen direwolves, his spores drifting like soft embers. He knelt, touching one gently, and a hush fell over them. Roots unfurled from his fingers, slithering to unhook their chains. The wolves stilled, eyes meeting his as the spores pulsed, calming, understanding. They turned and loped into the wild, free once more. Markin dumped the warlord's crown and spoiled maps onto the charred stone slab. His eyes roamed the red ink trails that traced roads like veins from beyond the ruined watchtower all the way to Kita. "They weren't raiders," he muttered. "They were scouts." Beam pressed a hand of Roots against the moss-slick slate. A pulse of sorrow, and something darker, shivered through his spores. His spores began reaching out to aid Blue, the squishing sound of his deep wounds closing. Blue stepped forward, covered in spores, axe still dripping gore. "Explain." Markin pointed at a crude wax seal stamped with knuckles. "That's gotta be the Ogre King. Everybody talks about him in town." Markin stared at the symbols and drawings. The map was not a language he understood, but the drawings started to make sense. "They're paving a path," Markin said, voice hollow. "A path for an army." Mr. E tapped his pocket watch absently. Time sputtered around them, and Mr. E's grin ghosted for a moment, uncertain. "An ogre invasion? No time for tea, then." Markin clenched his jaw. "We have to warn Kita." Beam's spores dispersed. Resolve. Proud. United. Blue's nostrils flared, steam hissing in a sigh. "To Kita first. Vengeance waits." Mr. E hesitated, then snapped the watch shut. "Forward, then." They rested for the night just outside the warband camp. Markin had wrapped the warlord's crown and cloth, proof of their fight. The next morning they trudged back through the Fellgrove, eventually crossing rutted roads and half-abandoned hamlets they'd missed before, till meeting again the night's cold hush. They stopped by the ruined watchtower, where the blood-stained grass still told of the battle, but Aldrich and Eliza were gone. No drag marks, no tracks in the mud, only silence and the rustle of wind through the collapsed stone. Markin lingered the longest, staring at the empty ground, jaw set tight. He didn't say a word. They made camp in a wind-swept hollow, a few miles from the watchtower, pale moonlight glinting off abandoned wagon wheels. The embers of their fire sputtered in the chill. Markin prodded a log. "Blue, the warlord, he said something about your father?" Blue sat apart, axe resting across his knees. Steam rolled from his nostrils as he studied the dying fire. Beam spores drifted in tight spirals. Curiosity, unease, something softer. Mr. E leaned against a charred stump, twisting his pocket watch. Oh, campfire confessions, my favorite kind of therapy. Blue's broad hand traced a lightning vein across his cracked horn. At home, the strongest leads. My father feared the day I would fight him, so he gave me to the hobgoblin. Silence, the crackle of bark. Beam's spores pulsed a slow, mournful rhythm. Mr. E smirked. Trading your air for power. Creative economics. Blue's glare snapped toward him, horns flaring bright blue for a moment. Then he bowed his head. He made his choice. Markin met his eyes. I'm sorry. A growl from Blue. Not anger. Acceptance. Beam's spores glowed warm. Support. Mr. E yawned theatrically. Well, at least your childhood wasn't boring. Blue cracked a half-smile. Boring is for the dead. After a few silent minutes, Blue picked his head up with a serious expression. When I bring them Olathontor, the great blue dragon's head, I won't have to fight him. Chapter 4. Dawn broke over Kita's walls as they crested the last rise. Bloodied, battered, but unbowed. Markin finally discovered how Mr. E kept himself clean when he spotted him casting magic on his clothes. Guards gaped at Blue's massive silhouette, and Beam in his entirety. The chill of late spring still clung to the air, a reminder that in the north, summer was a fleeting thing, slipping away before it could truly take hold. They were escorted to the council hall, where the torches burned like watchmen's eyes. The great hall's stone dais gleamed under the morning sun. Counselors in silken robes murmured around a polished ashwood table. Birdsong drifted through open windows. Lord Cedric was the lord over the lands that held Kita. His steward stood at the dais, pale and solemn. Yes, what is it you have to report? Markin stepped forward. Well, we defeated the hobgoblins, and... you have served Kita well, the steward interrupted. Surely the Adventurers Guild has payment enough for you. Yes. Yes, sir, Markin squeaked. Okay, then, I'm not sure what else. The Ogre King marches on Kita, Blue stated, clearly annoyed. One of the counselors spoke up. Ridiculous! We have no reports. Look, Markin nearly shouted as he unrolled his pack with the maps, items spilling out onto the floor. Without being asked, he stepped forward and placed one of the maps on the dais. As the steward stepped forward and gathered the map, Beam's spores drifted from his cloak like smoke. A soft green haze curled through the hall. A counselor sneezed. Another recoiled. By the gods, what is that? One shouted. Beam's face of bark remained inscrutable. His spores pulsed, widening like ripples. A counselor spoke up. What magic is this? Spore magic, hissed a guard. They say that's the Bloom's mark. Panic rippled through the assembly. Some rose, chairs scraping. Others backed toward exit arches. Blue's horns crackled with lightning. He planted his axe before Beam. He saves lives, Blue rumbled. A council elder swallowed hard. This is the corruption? You bring Bloom to Kita? A noblewoman shrieked and fled. A guard called for torches. Mark stepped between Beam and the hall. Stop! His voice cracked, but carried. Beam saved my life. His magic is not the Bloom. He's in control. Markin looked at Beam, confident. The spore cloud had continued to drift around the room. Markin guessed more from sorrow than on purpose. Beam's spores pulsed gently. Grateful. Friend. Some counselors relaxed. Others glared. At last, the steward, pale as bone, tapped his gavel. We will have to investigate, but no magic enters our gates unvetted again, he said, glaring over at the guards. Beam inclined his head once. Blue sheathed his axe with a clatter. Mr. E pocketed his watch, whistling softly. This certainly is the Ogre King's seal, the steward declared. I've come to the same conclusion. He means to march on Kita. The room erupted. Half of the counselors shouted orders, half blurted out their fearful thoughts. After a few moments, the room fell quiet again. Send scouts immediately to determine where they are on this path, the steward called to a man nearby. Begin training more town guards and seal the forest roads. We may have weeks, we may have days. Son, what is your name? Markin, sir. Markin Treefoot. All right. We hereby recognize you and your friends as honorary protectors of the realm. Will you help us? A murmur ran through the chamber. Blue attempted to hide his pride unsuccessfully. Beam's spores glowed softly, a quiet blessing. The room grew quiet. Yes, sir, Markin stated, standing just a bit taller now. Dismissed, the steward stated quickly, and the room was instantly in upheaval, with people moving in all directions. Wait, what? Mr. E exclaimed, snapping out of his daydream. What did I just agree to? The stone bridge beneath their feet arched high over the rushing fork of the river, the cold spray of mist rising with the wind, the sound of carts clattering over cobbles and the creak of river-hauled cranes filled the air. Kita sprawled out on either side, bustling streets, neat rows of timber homes, and further out the promise of forest and farmland beyond the walls. Markin turned mid-stride and walked backwards a few paces, gesturing up with his chin. There, that's where he lives. Lord Cedric's manor. The group followed his gaze. The keep loomed atop a steep escarpment, a forest of crimson roof and pale stone, its walls sheer and commanding above the split in the river. Flags whipped in the breeze, barely visible but proud. Built it himself. Well, paid for it himself, Markin said with a half-smile. Same difference. He brought in the best stonemasons in the kingdom. Some say even a famous dwarven stone priest from Falketia laid the first foundation block. Looks expensive, Blue murmured. It was, but that's how Kita was made. Lord Cedric didn't just raise a keep, he raised a town. Paid every craftsman better than they'd earn anywhere else. They came for the coin and stayed for the life. He stopped in the center of the bridge, letting the rest of the group catch up. Below them, the waters churned where the two rivers converged. Straight ahead, nestled on a small rocky island, between the two banks, the Adventurers' Guild stood like a red-roofed hub, bridges connecting it like spokes on a wheel. Dockhands called to each other from the piers below, and the faint clash of weapons echoed from the training yard beside the hall. And get this, Markin added, gesturing all around them. Once you gain citizenship here, the town pays you a monthly stipend, enough to live clean, eat warm, and keep your blade sharp. Mr. E let out a whistle. You don't even have to serve in the guard, though it helps. Everyone in Malcia wants to live here, they just don't all qualify. Blue narrowed his eyes. What's the catch? Markin's grin faltered for a moment. Well, you have to belong here, help the town, don't cause trouble, and if you make enemies of the wrong people, Kita might decide you don't belong here after all. The group walked on, crossing the final bridge toward the little island. But Cedric, Markin continued, his voice reverent again, he sees it all. From up there, he could spot an army forming on the southern fields or a spark in the granaries. There's nowhere in Kita that doesn't sit in his shadow. Blue muttered, Sounds more like a god than a lord. Markin stopped at the base of the stairs, leading into the Adventurers' Guild, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The morning sun caught the stained glass crest above the blue doors, an open hand holding a sword. He looked back once more toward the manor on the cliff. Some people say he knows things before they happen. He pushed open the heavy doors to the guild hall, and the smell, a mixture of firewood, sweat, steel, and ale, rolled out into the sunlight. Inside, apprentices bustled by stacked crates of arrowheads, coils of rope, and cured meat. At the long counter, an old man measured a new sword's balance with a knife-edge gaze. Markin stepped up to the front desk, where a clerk in a slate-blue tabard looked up from a ledger. "Job's done," Markin said. "The warband's broken, but—" His voice caught. "Eliza and Aldrich didn't make it." The clerk looked up from his sword. After a moment, he nodded, solemn. "I'll mark them down with honors and make sure their shares go to the next of kin." "Thank you," Markin said quietly. Blue stood behind him, arms crossed. Beam lingered near a corkboard stacked with postings. Spores shimmered faintly in the light. Mr. E wandered. Markin turned. "What else is available?" The old man flipped through a few pages. "Couple routine ones. Caravan escort to Bryn's Hollow. Missing livestock east of the apple fields. Probably bandits or wild dogs. But we've got tougher pulls, too." He flipped forward a few sheets. "There's a deep mine survey down near Fortin Peak. Miners hit something strange and stopped digging. And one from the Watchers, abandoned shrine outside the western forest, showing signs of arcane disturbances. That one sounds fun." A young apprentice nearby, maybe 17, stared at Beam with open awe. "You're him," the boy blurted. "The Mushroom Knight. People say you walked into the council chamber trailing spore blooms. Some say it's here now, and that it came with you." The air tightened. Beam didn't move, but his spores pulsed faintly. Sad. Wary. Markin stepped in. "He saved all our lives." He turned to the clerk. "We'll take the shrine job. Get us out of town for a bit." He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Right. I'll pack the rations for a week. Need anything else?" "A week? We probably shouldn't be gone that long with the Ogre King business," talking more to himself than the clerk. "We'll take the missing livestock. A boring job seems okay." Oh, I'm out of arrows," Markin said. "Spell components?" he asked, looking past Markin to Beam and Mr. E. Beam nodded once and began to peruse the shelves after the clerk motioned toward them. Mr. E blinked. "Oh, yes, probably. Which spell are we talking about again?" The clerk began gathering supplies and added them to the satchels, handing empty pouches to Beam and Mr. E. "Take what you need. We're more than compensated by Lord Cedric. By the way, all of you are full guild members now. Took the paperwork upstairs myself." Blue gave a cynical grunt. Beam's spores pulsed softly in what might have been gratitude. The Adventurers Guild Hall doubled as one of the liveliest taverns in Kita. Open to the public, its great hall swelled each night with locals, travelers, and would-be heroes drawn by the promise of strong ale and stronger stories. It was no accident. Free drinks flowed for anyone on the books with a job, and more than a few signatures had been scrawled on guild contracts after a round or two. After an evening of swapping tales with the brave adventurers and wide-eyed novices alike, Markin leaned back in his chair and looked across the table at his companions. "So you guys are good staying here tonight?" he asked, standing and adjusting his cloak. "There are rooms upstairs for members. I'm going to head home to see my mother and sister. I'll see you in the morning." The moon hung low over Kita, bathing the stone bridges and slate rooftops in a silver hush. Markin stepped out of the Adventurers Guild, boots thudding softly on the damp walkway as he crossed the stone bridge to the riverbank. Behind him, laughter drifted from the guild hall, Blue finally letting himself enjoy a meal after sharpening his axe. Beam meditating in a bed of moss he'd conjured in the courtyard. Mr. E fiddling with the deck of cards he claimed could speak. Markin tugged his cloak tighter. He wasn't tired. Not really. A figure leaned against a stone post at the end of the bridge, silhouetted by torchlight. She wore a deep blue cloak, pinned with the crest of House Redding, one of the prominent houses of Kita. She straightened as he approached. "Markin Treefoot," she said, not a question. He paused. "Yes?"
I'm Aelin Redding, Magistrate of the Outer Roads. You've made a name for yourself today.
Markin blinked.
I didn't do it for the name.
She nodded slightly.
Good. Kida needs more men like that.
Her eyes flicked past him to the guild behind.
You and your companions performed admirably out in the Fellgrove. I came with a proposition.
Markin looked at his boots and then up to Aelin.
All right. There's a hamlet south of here, Ironhold. Quiet place, or it was. The town guard officer stationed there, Captain Varen, has stopped reporting in. Locals say he's ruling it like a tyrant. Taxes doubled, public floggings, people vanishing.
Markin frowned.
Why haven't you sent anyone? We did. A magistrate. Young, sharp, never came back.
Her tone was flat, but the tightness pulled at her mouth.
We can't risk escalation. If we send soldiers, the merchant consortium will accuse us of overreach.
Politics.
So you want, deniability? I want justice, she snapped. Then, more measured. And yes, someone outside the chain of command, someone like you.
Markin hesitated.
And in return? We'll sponsor your citizenship until the council approves it, which we'll vouch for. Full rights, the stipend, and a good relationship with House Redding.
He looked past her, toward the path that wound up toward Lord Cedric's distant manor.
What about my friends? What do they want? Citizenship?
She extended a sealed scroll.
Map, right of passage, and authority to act in the name of House Redding if things go south.
Markin took it carefully.
Citizenship for them, maybe, if they want it. Or its equal in gold. Blue the Minotaur is looking for Olathontor.
Aelin's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed just slightly.
The Blue Tyrant.
Markin shrugged.
He has a past with him, one he wants to settle. There are whispers, Aelin said, voice low, glancing toward the river as if the water itself might be listening, that House Falcroy maintains a line of trade with the worm. Rare ores, gold, dragonbone relics, all under the table, of course. Lord Cedric wouldn't openly allow it, but Beatrice Falcroy plays the long game. She always has.
Markin's eyes darkened.
You're saying she protects him? I'm saying, Aelin said coldly, that if your friend gets too close to the truth, the merchant consortium might make sure he never returns, and they wouldn't need a dragon to do it.
The wind off the river sharpened. Markin looked toward the guild again, thinking of Blue's quiet fury, the way he looked into the fire like it owed him something.
Then I'll make sure he doesn't go alone. Any information you can give us about Olathontor would be appreciated, he said.
Aelin studied him, then gave a brief, respectful nod.
Be careful, Treefoot. There are old games playing out in this town, older than even Lord Cedric may admit. Don't let yourself be moved like a piece on their board. Leave at dawn.
And with that, she turned and vanished into the dark. Thanks for listening to War Beneath the Roots. If you enjoyed this story so far, consider following or subscribing and leaving a review. Until next time, keep your blade sharp and your fire burning.